A woman collapsed in my grocery store aisle, whispering, "He poisoned me." Then her husband appeared with her pill bottles, apologizing for her dementia. She grabbed my cart as she went down, her fingers white-knuckled around the metal frame, pulling herself partially upright before her knees buckled completely. I dropped my basket and caught her shoulders, lowering her as gently as I could to the linoleum floor between the cereal boxes and the organic granola. Her skin was clammy and gray, her lips had a bluish tint, and her breathing came in shallow gasps that sounded wet and labored. "Please," she whispered, her eyes locking onto mine with desperate intensity. "He poisoned me. My husband. He's been doing it for months. Antifreeze in my coffee. I can taste it. Sweet. Metallic. Please help me. Call the police. Don't let him take me home." Her hand clutched my wrist with surprising strength for someone who looked half dead already. I fumbled for my phone while keeping one hand on her shoulder to steady her. "Stay with me. I'm calling 911 right now. What's your name?" She tried to answer but started coughing, a horrible wet sound that brought up pink-tinged foam at the corners of her mouth. Her whole body was shaking, tremors running through her limbs. "Poison," she gasped out again. "Ethylene glycol, antifreeze, kidney failure. Test my blood, please. He'll say I'm crazy. Everyone thinks I'm crazy. But I'm not. I know what he's doing." Other shoppers had stopped, forming a loose circle around us, their faces showing confusion and concern. Someone asked if they should get the manager. Another person said they'd call for help. I kept my focus on the woman in front of me, her pale face, her terrified eyes. Before I could dial 911, a man appeared, pushing through the small crowd. He was in his late 50s, well-dressed in business casual clothes, with salt and pepper hair and glasses that gave him a professorial look. "Margaret, oh God, Margaret." He dropped to his knees beside us, his face creased with worry. "I'm so sorry. She got away from me in the parking lot. I just went to return the cart and she disappeared inside." He looked at me with exhausted, apologetic eyes. "Thank you for helping her. I'm her husband, David. Margaret has advanced dementia. This happens sometimes. She gets confused, disoriented, and she says things that aren't true." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out 2 orange prescription bottles, showing me the labels. "These are her medications, donepezil for the dementia and risperidone for the agitation and paranoia. She hasn't taken them today because she's been refusing her pills all week." Margaret's grip on my wrist tightened painfully. "No, don't believe him. Look at me. Do I look like I have dementia? I'm a retired professor. I taught chemistry for 30 years at the university. I know what antifreeze poisoning looks like because I taught about it. Crystals in the kidneys, metabolic acidosis. I've been documenting everything. I have evidence. Please." Her voice was getting weaker, her words slurring slightly now. David put his hand on her other arm gently, his expression pained. "Sweetheart, you're not well. We need to get you to the hospital. You're having another episode." He looked at me again. "She taught chemistry, that part's true. But the dementia has been progressing for 3 years. She fixates on the idea that I'm poisoning her. Her neurologist says it's a common paranoid delusion in dementia patients. They often accuse family members of trying to harm them." I looked between them, trying to assess the situation. Margaret's symptoms were real. The clammy skin, the labored breathing, the pink foam, those weren't psychological. But David seemed genuinely concerned, and he had prescription bottles with her name on them. "She needs an ambulance regardless," I said firmly. "She's having some kind of medical crisis. Real or imagined poisoning, she needs emergency care." David nodded immediately. "Of course. I should have brought her to the ER this morning, but she insisted she was fine and wanted to go shopping. I thought the outing might help her mood." He was already pulling out his own phone. "I'll call 911 right now." Margaret shook her head weakly. "He'll tell them the same lies. They'll believe him because he's calm and rational and I'm the sick woman having delusions. Please, look in his car. Check the garage at our house. You'll find antifreeze containers. You'll find my journal where I documented every day I felt sick, every time my coffee tasted wrong." The ambulance arrived within 7 minutes, paramedics moving efficiently through the store with their equipment. I stepped back to give them room, but Margaret reached for me again. "Don't leave, please. Be my witness. Tell them what I said." One of the paramedics, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes, knelt beside Margaret and started taking vitals. "Ma'am, I'm Kelly. Can you tell me what's happening? What symptoms are you experiencing?" Margaret tried to explain about the poisoning, but her words were getting more garbled, harder to understand. The other paramedic, a younger man, looked at David. "Are you family?" David nodded. "Her husband. She has dementia. This is her 2nd episode this month where she's collapsed. Her doctor is Dr. Patricia Holloway at County General. She's been treating Margaret for 3 years now." The paramedics exchanged a glance, and I could see them processing this information, fitting it into a framework that made sense. Elderly woman with known dementia having a medical crisis. They started an IV, checked her oxygen levels, asked David about her medications and medical history. He answered every question calmly and thoroughly, producing a folded paper from his wallet that listed all her conditions and medications. She has hypertension, type 2 diabetes, and early-stage kidney disease in addition to the dementia, he explained. Her kidney function has been declining for about 6 months. Dr. Holloway said it's probably related to her diabetes and age. Margaret was trying to speak, but the oxygen mask they'd placed on her face muffled her words. I could see the frustration and fear in her eyes, the way she kept looking at me, pleading silently for help. They loaded Margaret onto the stretcher, and David thanked me again for helping her. I'm sorry you got caught up in this. It's been a very difficult few years watching her decline. Some days she's almost herself, and other days she doesn't recognize me or thinks I'm trying to hurt her. The doctors say it's only going to get worse. His voice cracked slightly with what sounded like genuine emotion. As they wheeled Margaret toward the exit, she managed to pull the oxygen mask aside for a moment. Test my blood for ethylene glycol, she called out, her voice surprisingly strong despite everything. Metabolic acidosis, calcium oxalate crystals. The symptoms match perfectly. Then she was gone, the automatic doors closing behind the paramedics and the stretcher. David followed quickly, and I was left standing in the cereal aisle with a dozen curious shoppers and a store manager who was asking if I was okay. I should have let it go. It wasn't my business. I didn't know these people. But something nagged at me as I finished my shopping in a daze, barely paying attention to what I put in my cart. Margaret's eyes had been so clear when she first spoke to me, so focused and desperate. And she'd been specific about the poisoning. Not vague accusations, but exact chemical compounds and symptoms. I'm a paralegal, not a doctor, but I've worked on enough medical malpractice and personal injury cases to know that antifreeze poisoning was real and terrifyingly effective. It was sweet-tasting, which made it easy to hide in drinks. It caused kidney failure, and could be mistaken for other conditions if doctors weren't specifically looking for it. And yes, it could cause exactly the symptoms Margaret had shown. At home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I pulled out my laptop and started researching. Ethylene glycol poisoning. The initial symptoms were nonspecific: nausea, vomiting, confusion. But as it metabolized, it turned into toxic compounds that destroyed the kidneys and could cause neurological damage. The pink frothy sputum Margaret had coughed up could indicate pulmonary edema, which was consistent with severe poisoning. The timeline David mentioned, Margaret declining over 3 years, that could fit either dementia or slow poisoning. Small doses over time would cause gradual kidney damage that might be attributed to other causes. I found case studies of poisoning victims who'd been misdiagnosed with other conditions before anyone realized what was happening. I found articles about spouses who'd killed partners with antifreeze because it was hard to detect without specific testing. I also researched dementia and paranoid delusions. Found plenty of information confirming what David had said. Dementia patients often accused caregivers of abuse or poisoning. They could be very convincing in their delusions, creating elaborate explanations that seemed logical on the surface. It was one of the most heartbreaking aspects of the disease, destroying trust between family members and making care nearly impossible. Patients would refuse food and medication, believing they were being harmed when family members were desperately trying to help them. I sat there at my kitchen table, staring at my computer screen, unable to decide what I believed. Both explanations fit the facts. Margaret could be a dementia patient having paranoid delusions, or she could be a poisoning victim whose husband was using a convenient diagnosis to discredit her. The next day, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I called County General Hospital and asked about Margaret. They wouldn't give me information since I wasn't family, but I explained I'd been the one who helped her in the store and wanted to know if she was okay. The nurse I spoke to was kind but firm. I can't share patient information, but I can tell you that the patient you're asking about is still here and stable. If you'd like to visit during visiting hours, you could check with the nurses' station on the 4th floor. I thanked her and hung up, then stared at the phone. Visiting felt intrusive, but I couldn't shake the image of Margaret's terrified eyes, her desperate grip on my wrist, her plea to be her witness. What if she was telling the truth and I did nothing? What if she died because everyone dismissed her as crazy? I went to the hospital that evening after work, found the 4th floor, asked at the nurse's station for Margaret's room. The nurse checked her computer and told me Margaret was in room 427, but that her husband was with her. I hesitated, then decided to wait in the small lounge area at the end of the hall. About 20 minutes later, David emerged from room 427, talking on his phone. He walked past the lounge without seeing me, heading toward the elevators. I waited until he'd disappeared, then walked quickly to Margaret's room. She was alone, propped up in the hospital bed, an IV in her arm, monitors beeping softly. Her color looked better than yesterday, but she still appeared exhausted and fragile. When she saw me, her eyes widened with recognition, and something that looked like relief. You came, she whispered, her voice hoarse. I wasn't sure you'd believe me. Most people don't. I pulled a chair close to her bed. I'm not sure what I believe yet, but I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. How are you feeling? Margaret managed a weak smile. Better than yesterday. They're pumping me full of fluids and treating my kidney failure, but they think it's from my diabetes. They haven't tested for ethylene glycol because David convinced them I'm having dementia-related delusions. My doctor came by this morning and said my cognitive decline is accelerating and I might need to be placed in a memory care facility. Her hand reached for mine and I let her take it. I don't have dementia. I know everyone says that. I know confused people always insist they're fine, but I'm telling you I'm not confused. I'm being slowly murdered by my husband. I wanted proof, something concrete that would tell me which reality I was in. You said you kept a journal documenting everything. Where is it? Margaret's expression became guarded. Hidden. David searches the house looking for things I write. He's thrown away 3 journals already, claiming they upset me and feed into my delusions. But I have one he doesn't know about. It's in my office at the university. I have emeritus status, so I still have a small office in the chemistry building. I go there when David thinks I'm at the senior center for activities. The journal is in a locked drawer in my desk. There's also a flash drive with videos I recorded when I was having my worst symptoms, time-stamped and dated, evidence that can't be easily dismissed. Before I could respond, footsteps approached from the hallway. Margaret's eyes widened with fear. He's coming back. You have to go. If he sees you here, he'll know I talked to you. He'll know I'm trying to get help. She squeezed my hand urgently. Monroe Hall, 3rd floor, office 314. The key is taped under the desk drawer. Please, get the journal and the flash drive. Take them to the police. Make them listen. I stood up just as David appeared in the doorway. His friendly expression from yesterday was gone, replaced by something cooler and more assessing. Can I help you? Are you a friend of Margaret's? I forced a smile. I'm the woman from the grocery store yesterday. I just wanted to check that she was okay. I was worried. David's expression didn't warm. That's very kind, but as you can see, she's receiving excellent care. I think it's best if we limit visitors right now. She needs rest, and too much stimulation can trigger confusion. I nodded and moved toward the door, but Margaret called out. Wait, I didn't catch your name yesterday. I'd like to know who helped me. I turned back. I'm Claire Donovan. Margaret smiled, a genuine warm smile that made her look 20 years younger. Thank you, Claire. You're very kind to check on an old woman you don't even know. David walked me toward the door, subtly positioning himself between Margaret and me. Thank you for your concern, but we really do need to be careful about overstimulation. Margaret's condition is quite fragile. His voice was pleasant enough, but there was steel underneath. A clear message. Stay away from my wife. I left the hospital feeling more unsettled than before. Something about David's demeanor had shifted. Yesterday he'd been apologetic and grateful. Today he'd been territorial and dismissive. I couldn't let it go. Maybe Margaret was delusional and I was being drawn into her paranoid fantasy. Or maybe she was telling the truth and I was her only chance at survival. That night I called my boss, attorney Leonard Katz, who I'd worked for as a paralegal for 8 years. I trusted his judgment and his willingness to listen to complicated situations. I explained everything that had happened over the past 2 days. Leonard was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Claire, this is a minefield. If she has dementia, you're potentially interfering with her medical care and causing distress to her family. If she's being poisoned, you could be saving her life. The problem is you have no way to know which scenario is real until you have evidence. Did she really say she has documentation hidden at the university? I confirmed Margaret's claim about the journal and flash drive. Leonard sighed. If you go get those materials, you could be accused of theft or trespassing, depending on how her husband wants to play it. But if they contain evidence of attempted murder and you don't retrieve them, you'd be letting a crime continue. My advice, professionally, is to go to the police with your concerns and let them investigate. My advice, personally, is that if you genuinely believe this woman is in danger, sometimes you have to act first and deal with consequences later. Just be smart about it. Document everything. Take someone with you as a witness. And be prepared for the possibility that you'll find nothing except the confused writings of a sick woman. The next day was Friday. I took a long lunch break and drove to the university, a sprawling campus on the edge of the city. Monroe Hall was an older brick building, the chemistry department headquarters. I signed in at the security desk, saying I was there to meet Professor Margaret Lindholm. The security guard barely looked up, just waved me toward the elevators. 3rd floor, office 314. The door was unlocked. A small cluttered space with bookshelves covering every wall, papers stacked everywhere, an ancient desktop computer on a scarred wooden desk. It looked like an office that had accumulated decades of academic life. I closed the door behind me and felt under the desk drawer. Found the key exactly where Margaret said it would be, taped with old yellowing tape that suggested it had been there for years. The locked drawer opened smoothly. Inside was a blue spiral notebook, the kind students use for classes, and a small flash drive in a plastic case. I pulled out the notebook and started reading. Margaret's handwriting was neat and precise, the entries dated and organized. The first entry was from 2 years ago. January 8th, felt nauseous after breakfast. David made my coffee this morning, which he rarely does. Tasted slightly sweet, metallic aftertaste. Dismissed it at the time, but worth noting. The entries continued, creating a detailed timeline. Days when she felt sick always correlated with David making her food or drinks. Days when she prepared her own meals, she felt fine. She'd noted specific symptoms: nausea, confusion, dizziness, increased urination, back pain, all consistent with kidney damage. Later entries showed her deterioration. March 15th. Went to Dr. Holloway for kidney function tests. Results showed my GFR is down to 45, which is concerning. Doctor says it's probably my diabetes worsening, but I've been managing my diabetes well for 20 years without kidney problems. Started monitoring what I eat and drink more carefully. David is insisting I drink more water to help my kidneys, but I noticed the water bottles he gives me taste odd. Bought my own water bottles and hide them in my office. When I drink only my own water, I feel better. The journal went on for pages. Margaret describing her suspicions, then her certainty, then her attempts to gather evidence. She'd tried to save samples of drinks David prepared, but he'd found them and thrown them away, accusing her of being paranoid. The most damning entry was dated 6 months ago. July 22nd. I confronted David directly, told him I knew he was poisoning me with antifreeze. His face changed completely. He didn't deny it, didn't act shocked or offended. He just looked at me coldly and said, "Who's going to believe you, Margaret? You're already showing signs of dementia. I've been documenting your confusion, your memory problems, your irrational behavior. I've been to your doctor. I've prepared for this. Even if you tell someone, they'll think you're delusional. You're trapped." Then he made me a cup of tea and stood there watching me drink it, smiling. I knew it was poisoned, but what could I do? I drank it to avoid making him angry and making things worse. I've been trying to dump drinks without him noticing, trying to avoid anything he prepares, but it's difficult. He watches me constantly now. My hands were shaking as I read. If this was real, if Margaret was sane and accurate, this was a chronicle of attempted murder. But Leonard's warning echoed in my mind. This could also be an elaborate delusion, the writings of a paranoid mind creating a conspiracy where none existed. I needed to see the videos on the flash drive. I closed the journal, pocketed the flash drive, and was about to leave when I heard voices in the hallway. I froze, listening. 2 people were talking, coming closer. One voice was David's. "I told you, she's in the hospital. She won't be using this office anymore. I'm here to pack up her personal items before we transition her to memory care." The other voice was female, probably a department administrator. "I'm so sorry to hear she's gotten worse. Margaret was such a brilliant professor. It's heartbreaking." They were right outside the door. I had seconds before they'd come in. I looked around frantically for somewhere to hide. The office was small, no closets, no good hiding spots. I shoved the journal back in the drawer, locked it, and pocketed the key along with the flash drive I'd already taken. Then I did the only thing I could think of and positioned myself in front of the bookshelves, pretending to study the titles, as if I had every right to be there. The door opened and David walked in, stopping short when he saw me. His expression went through surprise, recognition, and then cold calculation. "Claire, what are you doing in my wife's office?" I kept my voice casual. "The security guard said I could come up. I wanted to return a book I borrowed from Professor Lindholm when I attended the university years ago. I was one of her students." David's eyes narrowed. "Which book?" I pulled a random chemistry textbook from the shelf. "This one. Organic Chemistry, 3rd edition. But I see she has the newer edition now, so I thought I'd just leave this one here." David took a step closer. "That's interesting because Margaret hasn't taught undergraduate organic chemistry in over a decade. She specialized in analytical chemistry and toxicology at the graduate level. Try again." The administrator woman looked between us, confused by the tension. I abandoned the pretense. "Fine. I came here because Margaret asked me to. She told me about the journal she kept documenting her symptoms. She thinks you're poisoning her, and frankly, after reading her entries, I think she might be right." David's face remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "So you broke into my wife's office and read her private journal. That's trespassing and invasion of privacy at minimum. Janet," he addressed the administrator, "can you please call campus security? This woman is harassing my family during a very difficult time." Janet pulled out her phone, looking uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, but you really shouldn't be here without permission. I need to call this in. I held up my hands. I'm leaving. You can tell security I left voluntarily. I moved toward the door, but David blocked my path. Not until you return whatever you took from that desk. I saw you putting something in your pocket. My heart hammered. If I gave him the flash drive and journal, Margaret would have no evidence. But if I tried to leave with them, I'd be arrested for theft. I didn't take anything. The lie came out steadier than I felt. David smiled without humor. Then you won't mind if we check your pockets before you go. He looked at Janet. This woman has been stalking my wife, showing up at the hospital, and now breaking into her office. I have every right to protect my wife's property and privacy. Janet looked miserable. Maybe we should wait for security to sort this out. Security arrived within minutes, 2 campus police officers who listened to David's complaint. He was smooth and persuasive, explaining about Margaret's dementia, about my inappropriate visit to the hospital, about finding me in a locked office I had no permission to enter. I believe she took my wife's journal and possibly other items. This woman has become obsessed with my wife's condition and is interfering with her medical care. The officers looked at me. Ma'am, do you have anything that belongs to Professor Lindholm? I made a split-second decision. Yes, I have her office key and a flash drive she asked me to retrieve for her. She gave me permission because she's afraid her husband is trying to erase evidence that he's poisoning her. One officer looked skeptical. Ma'am, Professor Lindholm is currently hospitalized with dementia. She's not in a position to be giving permission for anything. Her husband has medical power of attorney. David jumped in. That flash drive contains private medical information and personal videos. This woman has no right to them. I need them returned immediately. The officers exchanged glances. I could see them making their assessment. Distraught husband dealing with difficult situation versus stranger making wild accusations. Ma'am, we're going to need you to return the items and come with us to the security office while we sort this out. I pulled the flash drive from my pocket but kept the key. I want to file a report claiming that David Lindholm is poisoning his wife with ethylene glycol and using a false dementia diagnosis to discredit her. Her doctor needs to test her blood specifically for antifreeze metabolites. This flash drive may contain evidence supporting her claims. David's mask slipped for just a moment, real anger flashing across his face before he controlled it. This is absurd. My wife is sick. This woman is making her delusions worse by encouraging them. Officer, I want to press charges for harassment and theft. The senior officer took the flash drive from me. We'll hold on to this as potential evidence while we investigate these allegations. Ma'am, you're going to need to come with us. At the campus security office, they took my statement, which I gave in careful detail. Everything Margaret had told me, everything I'd read in the journal, my concerns about her symptoms matching antifreeze poisoning. The officers listened politely, but I could see the skepticism. David sat across from me, picture of a patient, suffering husband. Officers, my wife has been declining for 3 years. Her neurologist, Dr. Holloway, has extensive documentation of her cognitive deterioration. She's developed paranoid delusions specifically focused on me poisoning her. It's a common manifestation of her type of dementia. This woman, he gestured at me, encountered Margaret during one of her episodes and has apparently decided to believe her delusions. I don't know if she means well or has some other agenda, but she's causing harm to an already difficult situation. The security officers conferred quietly, then told me I was free to go but that I needed to stay away from Margaret and David, away from the university office, and away from the hospital. Any further contact could result in a restraining order and criminal charges. David reclaimed the flash drive, which made me want to scream, but I had no legal standing to keep it. I left the security office feeling defeated and angry. I still had the office key in my pocket, which they hadn't asked about and I hadn't volunteered, and I knew where the journal was. But without access to Margaret, without the flash drive, without any official backing, I was powerless to help her. I called Leonard from my car and told him everything. He was quiet for a long moment. You did what you could. Sometimes that's not enough. I'm sorry, Claire. That night I couldn't sleep. Images of Margaret's terrified face cycling through my mind. I kept thinking about the journal entry where David had essentially admitted to poisoning her, where he'd made her drink poisoned tea while smiling. If that was real, Margaret was going to die and there was nothing I could do about it. Unless. An idea formed, risky and probably stupid, but it might work. The next morning, Saturday, I drove back to the university. Different security guard at the desk, someone who hadn't been there yesterday. I signed in with a false name, went straight to Monroe Hall, 3rd floor. The door to office 314 was closed but unlocked. I slipped inside, relocked the desk drawer, photographed every page of Margaret's journal with my phone. Took almost an hour, but I documented everything. I also searched the rest of the office more carefully. Found a locked filing cabinet behind a stack of boxes. Used the same key Margaret had given me, which fit. Inside were medical records, Margaret's personal copies. Blood test results showing declining kidney function over 2 years. Hospital admission records from 3 emergency room visits in the past year, each time presenting with symptoms of severe dehydration, confusion, and kidney dysfunction. Discharge diagnoses mentioning possible dementia, urging follow-up with neurology. Lab reports, x-rays, everything carefully filed and organized. Margaret had been documenting her medical decline, trying to prove her case. I photographed everything, my phone storage filling up rapidly. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. A handwritten note in Margaret's writing dated 3 weeks ago. If I die or disappear, this journal and these records prove what David has done. He's been poisoning me slowly for over 2 years. His motive is financial. He convinced me to make him the sole beneficiary of my life insurance policy 2.5 years ago. $1 million. He also has power of attorney, which means when I'm declared incompetent, he controls my university pension and my investments, worth approximately $3 million total. He's been planning this carefully, establishing a medical paper trail that makes my death look natural and expected. Kidney failure from diabetes, dementia complications. No one will question it when I die. But I'm not delusional. I'm being murdered. I hope someone reads this and believes me. Below that was her signature and the date. I photographed it with trembling hands, making sure every word was legible. I spent the rest of the weekend compiling everything into a coherent document. Timeline of Margaret's symptoms, excerpts from her journal, copies of medical records showing declining kidney function, her statement about the financial motive. I researched ethylene glycol poisoning more thoroughly, finding medical journal articles about detection methods and case studies of poisoning victims. Many victims had been misdiagnosed initially with other conditions. Several had been thought to have dementia or psychiatric issues before the true cause was discovered. The symptoms could mimic dozens of other diseases, which made it an effective murder weapon if you were patient. David had been patient, slowly destroying Margaret's kidneys over years while simultaneously building a narrative of dementia that explained her accusations. Monday morning, I went to the police. Not campus security, real police. I brought printed copies of everything, organized in a binder. Asked to speak with a detective about a potential attempted murder. They made me wait for 2 hours in a small interview room before Detective Lisa Moreno appeared. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and businesslike. She listened to my whole story without interrupting, looked through my binder carefully. When I finished, she closed the binder and folded her hands on the table. Ms. Donovan, I appreciate you bringing this to our attention, but I have to be honest with you about what I'm seeing here. You have a journal and medical records belonging to a woman diagnosed with dementia. Dementia patients often create elaborate explanations for their condition. They document their delusions as if they're real. The fact that she wrote everything down doesn't make it true. I'd expected this, but it still frustrated me. Then test her blood. Specifically test for ethylene glycol metabolites. If she's being poisoned, it will show up. If she has dementia and I'm wrong, the test will come back negative and I'll leave this alone. Detective Moreno shook her head. We can't just order medical tests on someone without probable cause. Everything you've shown me could be explained by her illness. Her husband has medical power of attorney. Her doctor has diagnosed her with dementia. Without additional evidence suggesting a crime, we can't intervene in her medical care. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos from Margaret's journal. Look at this entry. David essentially admitted to poisoning her. He told her no one would believe her. That's consciousness of guilt. Detective Moreno studied the photo. Or it's a dementia patient's interpretation of a conversation that didn't happen the way she recorded it. Ms. Donovan, I understand you want to help, but you're not a medical professional. You're not qualified to diagnose whether this woman has dementia or is being poisoned. Her doctors are, and her doctors say she has dementia. I felt tears of frustration forming. So Margaret just has to wait until she dies? If I'm right and David is poisoning her, by the time there's enough evidence to convince you, she'll be dead. Isn't there any way to investigate before that happens? Detective Moreno's expression softened slightly. I'll tell you what I can do. I'll contact the hospital and suggest they run a tox screen on Mrs. Lindholm as a precaution. I'll phrase it as routine given her unexplained kidney failure. If anything suspicious shows up, we'll investigate further. That's the best I can offer right now. It wasn't enough, but it was something. I left the police station feeling slightly less helpless. At least someone in authority was paying attention, even if Detective Moreno was skeptical. That afternoon, I got a call from County General Hospital, a Dr. Simmons from the nephrology department. Ms. Donovan, I understand you expressed concerns about one of our patients, Margaret Lindholm. Detective Moreno contacted us and suggested we run additional tests. I'm calling to tell you that we did run a comprehensive toxicology panel on Mrs. Lindholm. My heart started pounding. And? Dr. Simmons paused. We found elevated levels of oxalic acid in her blood and calcium oxalate crystals in her urine. These are metabolites of ethylene glycol. Ms. Donovan, it appears you were correct. Margaret Lindholm has been poisoned. Everything moved quickly after that. Detective Moreno called me back within an hour, her tone completely different now. Ms. Donovan, we're opening a criminal investigation into David Lindholm. We need you to come in and give a formal statement. Everything you told me this morning, I need it officially documented. I went back to the police station, gave a detailed statement, handed over copies of all the documentation I'd compiled. Detective Moreno was apologetic about dismissing me earlier. I see too many people convinced they're uncovering conspiracies when it's usually much simpler. I should have taken you more seriously. The hospital is treating Mrs. Lindholm with fomepizole and hemodialysis to clear the poison from her system. We've also placed a police officer outside her room to ensure her safety and to make sure her husband doesn't try to interfere with her treatment. David was arrested that evening at his home. Police found antifreeze in his garage, multiple containers, and testing revealed traces of antifreeze in travel mugs and water bottles in the house. They seized his computer and found searches for undetectable poisons, how to fake dementia symptoms, and life insurance payout timeline. His phone had searches for ethylene glycol detection methods and how to dispose of poisoned food. He'd been researching ways to kill his wife and make it look natural, documenting his own crime. They also found financial records showing David was deeply in debt, had lost money in bad investments, and desperately needed Margaret's insurance money and pension assets. The financial motive Margaret had written about was completely accurate. Dr. Holloway, Margaret's neurologist, was shocked when police informed her about the poisoning. She reviewed Margaret's medical records with fresh eyes and realized that many symptoms she'd attributed to dementia could also be explained by chronic poisoning. I feel terrible, she told me later when I visited Margaret in the hospital after David's arrest. I dismissed her concerns because they fit the profile of paranoid delusions. I should have considered other possibilities. I should have listened more carefully. Margaret was recovering slowly, the poison being flushed from her system, her kidney function gradually improving. When I visited, she was sitting up in bed looking weak, but more alert than I'd ever seen her. You saved my life, she said, reaching for my hand. Everyone else thought I was crazy, but you believed me enough to investigate. I pulled a chair close to her bed. You saved yourself. The journal, the medical records, the note you left explaining everything. You documented evidence even when you knew no one was listening. That's what made the difference. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I was so scared, feeling myself getting sicker, knowing what he was doing, but having everyone tell me I was confused and imagining things. Watching David play the concerned husband while he slowly murdered me. It was like being buried alive. She squeezed my hand. When I saw you in the grocery store, I thought maybe this was my last chance. I had to try one more time to make someone hear me. I'm so grateful you did. The trial took 8 months. I testified about finding Margaret in the grocery store, about her desperate plea for help, about the journal and medical records I'd discovered. Prosecutors built a comprehensive case. David's computer searches, the financial motive, the antifreeze found in the house, the elevated poison levels in Margaret's blood, and Margaret's own testimony, now clearly articulate and rational without David's influence. Dr. Holloway testified about how the symptoms she'd attributed to dementia were actually consistent with poisoning. A toxicologist explained how ethylene glycol poisoning could mimic other conditions, making it hard to detect unless you knew what to look for. The defense tried to argue that Margaret was still mentally ill, that her journal was delusional rambling, that the antifreeze in the garage was for legitimate purposes. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty of attempted murder. Guilty of fraud for faking Margaret's dementia diagnosis with Dr. Keating, who'd also been arrested for falsifying medical records in exchange for payment from David. Guilty of conspiracy. The judge sentenced David to 25 years in prison. Margaret attended the sentencing, sitting in the front row, finally vindicated. When the sentence was read, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath, the weight of 3 years of terror finally lifting. Afterward, outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded us asking questions. Margaret stood straight and spoke clearly. For years, I was told I was crazy. I was told my fears weren't real, that I was sick and imagining things. I want everyone to know that when someone tells you they're in danger, even if they seem confused or unreliable, please listen. Please investigate. My life was saved because one person took my cry for help seriously instead of dismissing me as a demented old woman. 3 years after David's conviction, Margaret and I met for coffee at a cafe near the university. She'd fully recovered, her kidney function had returned to near normal levels, and she'd successfully sued for wrongful commitment and medical malpractice against Dr. Keating, who'd lost his license. She was teaching again, part-time, and had written a book about her experience called Poison Trust, One Woman's Fight to Be Believed. The book had become a bestseller, raising awareness about both domestic violence and the dismissal of victims who seemed unreliable or mentally ill. Margaret looked healthy and vibrant, nothing like the terrified, dying woman who'd collapsed in the grocery store aisle. I'm thinking about starting a foundation, she told me. to help other people who are being abused or endangered but aren't believed because of age, mental health issues, or other factors that make them seem unreliable. So many people are in situations where they're trying to ask for help, but no one takes them seriously. I told her I thought that was a brilliant idea, and I'd volunteer to help if she needed legal assistance. Margaret smiled and raised her coffee cup in a toast. To being believed, to evidence and persistence, and to grocery store angels who stop to help dying women instead of walking past. We clinked cups, and I felt the satisfaction of knowing I'd made the right choice, even when it had seemed risky and potentially foolish. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is listen when someone says they're in danger, even if everyone else insists they're confused or wrong, because that moment of belief can be the difference between life and death. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.